June 76, there was a very serious engagement west of Chipinge, I think it was, involving Neil Jackson, that you were involved in.
The incident in June 1976 with Neil Jackson, he was with 3 Platoon, 5 Independent Company. He was the youngest bloke ever to fly as in the K car as a commander of ground forces. And there was this punch-up, and 5 terrorists had been killed, and one chap had managed to run into a tree line. The chaps followed up, and they didn't see this guy, and he opened up on them, and he unfortunately dropped Mark Torrington and John Crew. They were killed at that time, except it wasn't known that they were killed. And we could, again, it was like the Battle of Blood River that I explained earlier. As I said, we couldn't put any suppressing fire on this guy because we had 2 wounded guys, as far as we were concerned, in a way. But in the end, Rich Ament and Rob Smith from the call sign actually snivelled in there very bravely, and they managed to extricate the blokes. But they found out that the terrorist wasn't on the ground under cover. He was actually sitting in a tree, and he had full range of fire over anything coming into that wooded area. Once these guys, I think they got bronze crosses for that, once they'd extricated them, the deceased, Russell Broadbent, who was a New Zealander, he was actually a doctor, but he was flying the legs, and he then had a good idea of where this guy was. Anyway, he destroyed it and turned it all into matchwood, and we got the guy. But that was a very sad day, because once again, we were the losers.
Greg, you were going north at Chipinge. You were involved. Was it in one of the attacks on Leopard Rock Hotel?
We were operating out of FAF 8 Umtani, and for whatever reason, somebody came round with a Alouette 3 that was in training configuration. It had all the doors on. It had the dual controls fitted. So the pilot normally flies it from the right-hand seat, and the instructor or the second pilot would be in the centre seat and has full flying controls. And all the seats in the front face forward. So Wally Wallace was the engineer. He was in the left-hand seat. I won't name the pilot because, he unfortunately has passed away since. But we had a mission to go to Leopard Rock and deliver something. The pilot was flying from right-hand seat and waving at all the troops driving around the roads by Nyanga in the mountains. We came around this one corner, and suddenly we were in cloud. Well, Alouettes aren't equipped to fly at dark nights or in cloud. And unfortunately, he panicked, and he was pumping the collective up and down. The VSI vertical speed indicator was giving a rate of climb of 2,000 feet a minute, 2,000 feet a minute down. We weren't actually doing that, but that's the input he was putting in. And if you ever saw in the front of a helicopter, you had that little mast with a bit of cotton or a bit of wool on the back. And that was, hopefully, when you're flying straight and level or whatever, that should flow straight back and give you extra indication. Well, this bit of wool slowly tapered and was hanging down. Then it was going the other way, which meant we were flying backwards, with no speed on the clock. Pumping this thing, and I thought, I could have taken control myself. And I thought, no, I'll just talk him through it. And I said to him, first off, stop pumping the collective. Just put it in a position where you think is about right. And he did. And now we've got 300 feet a minute descent. I said, pull it a bit more. Now we were level. I said, a bit more. Now we're climbing. Now I'm a little bit happier. But we're still going backwards. I said, okay, cycle it. Ease it forward. And this started to point the right way. Then the airspeed started to come up. And I said, okay, 45 knots. Hold that. And then put on the bank. And we spiraled out. We must have been over Mozambique. I don't know. But we spiraled up. And we broke out between 2 layers of cloud, and you could see to fly normally. We were flying normally, but on instruments prior to that. And we just headed west, back towards Rhodesia. And there was a hole in the clouds, the lower layer of clouds. And we went down there, and we came out straight over Umtali Grand Reef. Wally Wallace got out and he said, I don't want to swear, but he was very relieved. And interesting, people don't believe about flying helicopters at night and think that's the sort of things, we had one that actually did crash going into Thornhill. I can't remember the crew, but he got disorientated And unfortunately for him, there wasn't another pilot there to help him sort it out. Yeah, the other thing I've got on my list, consulting my notes, is the new recce thing, 19th of April, Easter Sunday. Everything seems to happen on the Easter Sunday. They had the trout rally, which is where all the bikers from Africa and South Africa go, and they'd had that in Mtali somewhere. It's called a trout rally. And these guys, and that goes on, and I've actually done one later myself after the war, but not as a biker, as a supporter. But there's too much drinking going on and things like that. And these guys were actually going home to South Africa, 2 bikes with pillion passengers, and they came across this group of terrorists on the road. They mistook them for security forces. An altercation arose, and these guys just opened up on them, and they killed 3 of them. One guy somehow managed to get away, but the next day I was called up to do the follow-up, and I went in there with Ant White of the SAS and to do the follow-up. But they had also hit a train prior to the motorbike incident, and it was the double-headed diesel locomotives, and they had put landmines in the railway line, obviously boosted it, and both locos were on their sides, derailed, and the rest of the train was strung out behind them, and they'd revved the train with AK fire, hadn't injured anybody. I don't know what happened to the drivers. They probably were injured, but they'd been removed by the time we got there. And we did the follow-up, leapfrogging and trying to find tracks and things like that. The bottom line was, unfortunately, we didn't catch these guys. But
they killed 3 of the 4 bikers.
They did indeed. Yeah.
It was on the Bike Bridge Road.
It was on the Fort Vic to Bike Bridge.
Yeah, I remember that.
Apparently, some South African chappie and his wife arrived in a car shortly thereafter, and they just fired into the bush around, and then they gave assistance or tried to sort it out and set off the alarm sort of thing. And the troops came to help. The other one, this annoyed the hell out of Pete Simmons, because for a long time he's been asking me what I did for 6 days, flying around with the station commander in a helicopter away from base. We went down to Bulawayo and Cheretsey and places like that. But I was actually we were actually with a colonel from the South African Airforce. And basically, we were looking for potential sites to put up the early warning radars. So if they thought they were going to be attacked in South Africa, by putting the equipment in the south of Rhodesia, they would have that much more advanced and scramble their guys to counter-attack. But it was very interesting, and some of the places we went to. But anyway, that was top secret for a while. Well, it still is. One of the things we did on the 6th of June 76, unfortunately, there was a landmine incident near Chipinge, and it was a bucky, a pickup, and it was both the family, husband, wife, 2 kids, and a girl called Shirley Wicksteed.
Wicksteed, yes. Lost her legs.
Yeah. They were on the back of the bucky, holding onto the rail just behind the cab, and they had the mine with the rear wheels, and it flipped the truck over and just disintegrated the back. All I saw when I got there was two bits of, because it was lying at an angle of 45 degrees, nose down, and just 2 bits of chassis, all the springs, axle, everything had gone. And his wife was next to him, and these guys are now upside down, and she'd gone mauve and purple, and she'd obviously passed away, and we were reassuring him, everything's okay. The 2 kids, terrible mess, and poor Shirley Wicksteed, very, very, she survived, obviously, and I think it was Mark Aitchison. He casevaced her straight away to, I think, Cheretsey Hospital, and she became quite famous in Rhodesia for, lifting morale of people with similar injuries. But we still had the problem of getting the father, Mr. Bertha, out of this truck, because the door was all twisted and jammed. And somebody had come in with oxyacetylene kit, and they were about to light this lot up and cut him out. So, can't you smell the fuel? If you do that, you're going to fry him. Never thought of that. Okay, well, anyway, we got from some road gang some long crowbars and brought them back, and the guys were able to prise the doors open and get him out. But a bit of a mess of a scene, yeah, very, very sad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Chipinga area was incredibly hard hit. Chipinga, Cashel, Alseta, wow, just about completely cleaned out. They took a very, very hard knock.
Well, while we were there, we were based at Chipinga, and there's the nurses there, and there was going to be this football matches, Blues and Browns versus the hospital staff. There was supposed to be a lot of fun. Anyway, we got called out, off we went, so we didn't partake. But there was this Rhodesian VR, I think he worked for the telecommunications centre in Bulawayo, a guy called Tony Robinson. Anyway, he got injured during this, social soccer game, and he was complaining about his leg. So we spoke to the doctor and said, well, tell him he's got a broken leg, and put him in plaster. So he did. And this guy walked around on crutches from groin to toes in plaster of Paris with his leg all signed. After 3 days, I said, called the doctor and said, you can cut this off now. We've had all fun. He was not amused. Yeah. Right. It wasn't all war. We had a lot of fun. But in Mount Darwin, I bought some biltong and it wasn't ready for eating. So I opened up about 6 paper clips and stuck it in a locker that we had to dry out a bit. And I went to do a relay change. And when I came back, the biltong was gone. And each paper clip was a piece of paper written mice. The guys had carved my biltong, and I thought, I know who it was. It was Jarvie and Tubbs. Usual guys. I did a few ops with I did lots of ops with SAS, but this one was where they're operating as Fire Force to give relief to the RLI at some stage. And I was my Fire Force was at Retenga, and the op was going to be done from Buffalo Range. I think it was FAF7. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it was technical or what, their K car wasn't able to operate. So I, just in my K car, Bert Keatley is my engineer, flew across and we linked up, landed, picked up Brian Robinson as K car commander and set off with their Fire Force. And Simo was the other K car driver. He came along to join us later after his aircraft was serviceable. We were talked on to a thing from the OP by the Zulu Scouts. You can see these terrorists, and we started to open fire, but the K car was just bang, nothing, recock, bang, nothing, recock, bang. It was just total stoppage. So I thought, well, the quickest thing to do is put it on the ground, and I don't want to go miles away because these guys are bomb shelling. I couldn't be landing amongst them after they bomb shelled. So I landed right next to the Zulu Scouts. Bill Sykes and his helicopter came down, landed right next to me. His tech jumped out, my tech jumped out, opened the cowling, the cowling on the left side where the ammo was stored. And one of the clips holding the tray or train for the ammo had become detached. So they clipped it back, got airborne again, and of course now the element of surprise, well and truly lost. Follow-ups continued throughout the day. We talked the DAC in, they dropped their sticks, and Simo came along later and with a second K car. I think at the end of the day, we got 12 of about 36. Wow. And we're mopping up, and I'm flying back with Brian Robinson. He said, well, what do you think of that, Greg? I said, it's the biggest cock-up I've ever been in my life. He said, why? I said, well, this is what, they're just... The SAS were magnificent troops, but not at Fire Force, in my opinion. They may have got better later, I don't know. 12th of November 76, we'd been doing an operation, again, with, may have been the SAS, I'm not sure. At the end of the day, mopping up, we had to bring parachutes out of the drop zone to the what's called the land tail, which is the follow-up troops. They brought fuel and extra sticks as close to the contact area as possible. But this was just a short hop, about 3 or 4 miles. And what we'd do, the troops were on the ground trying to get these parachutes out of trees and things like that. Occasionally we'd go and hover next to them and blow them up and help them inflate and get them out the trees. But they'd get a whole pile of parachutes, and because of expediency, we'd just pile them on in the back of the helicopter, and then the tech would make like a starfish and straddle them, and so that no bits and pieces flew out, and then we'd fly them to the land tail, and with rotor still running, get them off and go back for another batch. Anyway, we just landed probably from the second batch, and getting the parachutes off, and I see a red thing amongst them. And I was with Tech Tony Jordan. I said, Tony, what's that? Is that our fire extinguisher? He grovels around, gets it out. Yes, it is. Clips it back onto the bulkhead of the back of the helicopter. End of story. Well, it wasn't the end of the story, because I think about 2 days later, I've been trooping again from Buffalo Range. One of my last tasks was to pick up a stick of Zulu Scouts, and I don't think they had a white officer with them or a white operator with them. They were all black troops, as you know, a lot of them turned terrorists. But I'd had trouble with the landing light, and it wasn't retracting properly, and it was giving a problem. Anyway, as we were returning to Buffalo Range to the fort, I was sort of smelling things. What's that? And I turned around and I looked at the back, and there's just sparks and flames between the back of the cab and the other half of the helicopter, which is just where the fuel tank was. So it was 6 inches in front of the fuel tank. And what to do? Oh, don't like this. And I threw it at the ground, auto-rotated, and I didn't have to auto-rotate, but it was the quickest way to get down, and then pulled power, landed it. Fortunately, there was a field big enough to take 2 choppers, and I landed it at the end of the field, leaving space for a second chopper. Tony got out. I was still closing the helicopter down, shutting motors, and he got the fire extinguisher off the wall, and he went to put the fire out. Well, he pressed the lever, and a squirt of water went... The thing had discharged 2 days before, when it had been pulled out the aircraft by the ropes of the parachute, and it had gone off then. So he had no option. He took his shirt off and beat the bloody flames out with his shirt. So I think we got I did. I got a commendation for that, amongst other things. The DMM, Drinking Man's Medal, we called it.
The flames and sparks, where were they?
No, the electrical from the landing light problem.
Okay.
So it obviously seized or arced or whatever and burnt the electrical loom, and by the time I got to see it and smell it, it was now burning furiously behind me, or behind the tech rather, or the troops, and the troops weren't too happy to guard the helicopter. Anyway, continuing from that, I got a Mayday call out before I landed, and the first person on the scene was Todd DMM in a Cessna 185, a Kivet, and he came over, and I could hear him, I could see his lights, so I fired a mini flare, pencil flare, and I had my, what they call it, SABI, search and rescue beacon, so I was able to talk to him. And he, on the way, he was faster, but on the way, the cavalry was John Blyford flying a helicopter with his tech, and Mike Borles as safety pilot, because it was pitch black, and as I've explained, not a good idea. So they managed to come down and land and pick us up and take us away. And I saw the helicopter a couple of days later on a recovery vehicle, and the whole inside, or the whole area behind the cabin, was just scorched as flame marks. So it was a lucky break, because if that field hadn't have been there, we would have ended up in the trees.
Greg, from 7th Squadron, you went on to Canberra's.
Yeah, went on to Cairns. Initially, we trained on something called a T4, which is a training aircraft, and that had 2 ejector seats and dual controls, and 2 pilots sitting next to each other, the navigator in the back, and basically that was just doing lots of circuits and bumps and instrument flying and things like that. And then doing it solo, the instructor would get out and you'd fly it off by yourself. And then to go on to the B2, that was just a single pilot operation. And the instructor would come with you. Well, initially he flew the aeroplane and I sat on the jump seat next to him. And he, so I was watching what he did, circuits and bumps. And then he would we'd land, swap positions, and then I'd fly it, and he would sit there and say, all right, you're doing okay, you're doing that wrong, or whatever, as it goes. But that was, and then the carried on operational conversion unit, learning how to do photo recce and all sorts of various bomb profiles. When we did photo recce, it was usually quite high and a long time in the air, and the aircraft would get so cold. It was a thing called cold soaking, because the temperature's up there very, very cold. And we would, when we were doing photo recce, we would wear a tracksuit under our flying overalls, for warmth when you get up there. But you're taking off from 25, 30 degrees at Salisbury with this great big bubble canopy. It's like a magnifying glass. And the theory was that if you hadn't got airborne within 20 minutes, you gave it away because you'd sweated so much, you'd lost so much weight. And just an aside, the comforts of flying at Canberra at altitude doing photo recce. And some of those flights were so long. And I remember one time I was flying with Doug Paget, and he says, Greg, I think my arse has just gone to sleep. I said, why, Glob? He said, no, I've just heard it snore. 100% oxygen, go. Because he's flying, his bum is about 4 feet in front of you. Yeah. The other trick they used to do is tie your shoelaces to the rudder pedals so you couldn't get out the aeroplane. Anyway, one of the things that were very innovative in the Air Force with inventions, and when sanctions happened, industry, we did everything to beat sanctions, as you know. And to start at Canberra, you used to use a starter cartridge. These starter cartridges were, to start the Canberra motor, you needed one for each motor, and 300 would not have lasted us too long had we used the cartridges. So they invented a system whereby you had compressed air, a special attachment to the nozzle which went into the breech where the starter cartridge would have gone. You had a big wire mesh grid that went over the front of the engine so that nothing got ingested into the engine. And when you were ready to start the engine, you give a thumbs up. The guy on the ground who's looking at you would just open his compressed air, probably about 5 or 6 bottles, the high pressure, and it would spin up the motor with less stress than using a starter cartridge. And you'd open the fuel lever and press the emergency relight lever, button rather, and the bangers would go and set off the fuel, and there you were, burning and turning. But and we had in the main bases we had these compressed air bottles for starting. So there's one way of beating sanctions, and we weren't going to be brought to our knees in 3 months or whatever Harold Wilson said.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, flying, recce flying, very accurate flying was needed. It's like doing astro shots for the NAMs. Half a degree, 1 degree of bank speeds, so that because the actual cameras would take overlapping pictures. I think they overlap by about 20-30%. So you had to keep them aligned, very accurate flying. Nav was in the nose, something called a banana sight, and he was tracking on his map, and we were looking for either mostly for mapping purposes or looking for terrorist camps. And with the overlap, the blokes in GISPAS, Joint Services Photo Interpretation Centre Service, they could actually, through stereoscopic lenses, get 3D out of these things, and that would really help them find camps. And we went far and wide, and a lot of the attacks we did, the blokes had maps and photographs to work off, and likewise the ground jobs we supplied them. I have spoken about the loss of Keith Goddard and Rich Airy, and with the 96 20-pound bombs that had the accident that destroyed the aircraft. We were then, it was before I got to the squadron, they weren't able to use the Canberra for close support anymore until they developed something else. And Peter Betterboyer and Cochrane's engineers came up with a solution, and they developed it. And it was called a bouncing bomb. And essentially what it was, there is John's going to produce a picture of it, but to describe it, it had little rubber balls, and they were super bounce. So if you dropped them from a height, they would recover 90% of the height from which they were dropped. and they were placed inside a small light gauge metal shell. Then the balls, and then inside of that was a cast iron, quarter-inch cast iron. That was the shrapnel, and the inside of that was obviously the explosive. And it had something called an always pistol. Didn't matter which way up it bounced, it would detonate 0.06 of a second after impact. So the thing was, you screamed in at 350 knots, 300 feet, and you dropped these bombs, and it was sufficient speed for them to hit the ground, bounce up, enough G initiate, and they'd blow up about 10 feet above the ground. And when you drop them en masse, it's quite impressive. Very good area of shrapnel. Mm-hmm. Each aircraft had 6 hoppers with 50 of these Alpha Mark II bombs in them, and you could drop any combination of 50 up to 300. And on the big raids, when we were flying externals, we'd fly 4 abreast, and each aircraft would cover an area of 150 yards wide by 600 yards long. So with 4 of us abreast, we covered a blanket area of 600 yards by 600 yards. And that's how we did a lot of the externals, like FC camp and things like that. One of the things about dropping these bombs, the safety height was considered to be 300 feet. But if you drop into rising ground, it's rather like dropping parachuters out of a DAC into rising ground. They don't like it. And likewise with these bombs. Anyway, one of our aircraft dropped bombs, and a piece of, because a lot of the shrapnel obviously is going up as well as down, and a piece of shrapnel came through the nose cone, and it was very hot, and it hit the nose cone. Fortunately, it bent in an L shape. The nav was still lying on his couch at the bomb site, and it hit him straight in the sternum. And as I say, luckily it was L-shaped, otherwise it would have gone straight through him. And a flat piece of the L lodged. It was Paddy Morgan. Anyway, when they got back, he was my navigator normally, and he was flying with somebody else. And I was out there, obviously radioed ahead to say, we got an injury, and the medics were there to get him out. And when I opened the hatch and saw him, I said, Jesus, Paddy, you'll do anything to get out of flying with me, won't you? And I've got a photograph of another incident where Glenn was involved, whereby he was hit by a SAM-7 Strela, and it opened up the back of his port engine, just like a peeled banana. And, obviously he closed it down and flew back on one motor. But we don't know if later on, I think it was off Urich, when we lost a Hunter and a Canberra, I don't know if that was hit by a SAM-7 or 37 mil or whatever, but that's another story. That was after I'd left the squadron. Mm-hmm. What we did at night from altitude was a technique called offset bombing. It involved special operatives going to the camp, finding a terrorist camp, and then putting 2 flares out. Initially, they would be there to light the flares themselves, which is highly dangerous. Later, we developed a thing called RAMS, which is remotely activated market system. And you'd fly with a radio transmitter on your thigh, and you'd initiate with 2 buttons. You'd initiate the flares yourself. The principle was, if you had 2 flares in line with the target, that gave you your lineup, and obviously it worked out with heading and drift. But to get a sighting picture for the navigator on the bomb site, they would pick a point. The aircraft has got to be in a position to get a bomb on the target. So if the aircraft's in the same position, you could take a false aiming point and make a correction to your sighting angle mathematically. That's what we did. The second flare was the false target, and that's what we bombed. We bombed the second flare, but of course the bomb would actually go across and hit the target. I hope that makes sense. It worked. Mm-hmm. And we did a lot of operations with this offset technique. Mm-hmm. And hats off to the guys on the ground. They did a wonderful job. Mm-hmm. And it had to be so accurate, their grid reference and things like that. And they were operating off photographs as well. And, they put the flares where they could.
Greg, one of the more memorable bombing raids was the attack on the Zipra base just outside Lusaka, which become known as the Green Leader attack. And that was just an airborne attack, there were no ground troops involved. Ground troops came in later on other targets. But just talk us through the actual, what you remember of that actual that raid.
That was Freedom Camp, FC Camp on Westlands Farm.
Yeah.
It was about 5 k's or miles northeast of Lusaka.
Yeah.
And we'd actually discovered it by photo recce, and I think there'd also been operatives observing it, and smirching around.
On the ground, yeah.
Yeah. This actually was in retaliation for the first Viscount that was shot down, the Anyani. I think it was Victor Popper Whiskey Alpha Sierra with John Hood and Garth Beaumont and 52 passengers on board it. And they had taken off from Kariba and were climbing out when it was hit by a SAM-7 in the inner starboard engine. And that burst into flames and put the outer engine out of action as well. And these guys did a wonderful job in force landing this aircraft because it wasn't going anywhere on 2 engines and on fire. And he tried to put it down in a field. I think it was a cotton field or something like that. But it wasn't long enough, and also it had a ditch across the front, across the middle of it. And although he landed it all right, as soon as the nose wheel hit that ditch, well, the aircraft just cartwheeled and broke apart, and things like that. And most of the people were killed. But there were 18 survivors, and some of them were badly injured. And people got out of the aircraft and passing babies through broken bits of fuselage and things like that. I mean, it's a well-known story. But the other thing is, of course, that 8 of them went looking for help. And while they were away, another terrorist group came across the survivors and massacred the remaining 10, which was not, it didn't do very much good for our morale or anything like that. And the annoying and aggravating thing about it was Joshua and Koma bragging about it and laughing. It really upset. So I think it's a political decision to retaliate for this. And that's when the raid on FC came about.
What was the sort of plan of attack from the air? How was it structured?
Involved were four Canberras, 7 or 8 hunters. The story was, we got airborne from Surham, we headed up to high level, we headed up to Mana Pools. And the hunters, I think they got airborne from Filey or maybe Thornhill. We met up with our section, blue section, 4 hunters. And the other 2 hunters, Alpha Wild and Jim Stagman, were orbiting Mumbai Airfield. Or later on, they got to orbit there. And then we had another pair of hunters for restrike and reserve, also airborne in the area. And the command deck, of course. When we got to Mana Pools, we were down to low level, and the hunters were with us, and they were carrying 1,000-pound bombs and also these golf bombs, and they were airburst bombs. And the story was that we flew north to Mana and then and then turned west, thereby flying around the Air Force base of Mumbai and attacking in the direction we wanted. And these guys were supposed to be on the parade ground at 8 or 8:30 or whatever it was in the morning, all out there doing the marching or whatever, or roll call, we don't know. And at the IP, the hunters would accelerate and climb up because they had to get up to about 10,000 feet. And they would turn in at 90 degrees to our attack and mark for us. So there's 4 hunters going down there and dropping these golf bombs and 1,000-pounders. And we were literally there within 30 seconds, 40 seconds afterwards with the Canberras. And we were 4 of us, as I said earlier, line abreast, dropping 300 of these Alpha 2s. And we ran through. You can hear the nav on the tape giving Chris Dixon, that nav is Mike Ronnie, left, steady, bombs gone, the usual patter. We ran through and dropped the bombs, and then we came out, obviously started low level back to across Lake Kariba, I think is the way we went back. And the hunters were coming back for restrike, and then they sent in 4 gunships with 20 mil, and they were picking off targets, and hunters were still in the area to take out more formidable targets. A lot of the gunships had stoppages, which is a bit unfortunate, but a lot of death and destruction occurred on that day. And that raid was the first of 3 that the Canberras did that day, because we also did an attack on Mkuzi and that was SAS we put in on the ground after that. And then we went back to Suriname, rearmed, reloaded, refueled, and we did attack on CG2 camp, training camp, and the RLI were involved in that. So it was a lot of effort, a lot of bombs dropped, and I think one of the camps were found to be mostly with women terrorists.
Makushi,
yeah. Makushi. But that was it. But when I got back, probably the next day after the 3 bombing sorties, I was the squadron adjutant, and Chris Dixon asked me to. He had a tape recorder there recording the whole incident, and I had the tape. I made a copy of it, and I transcribed the pertinent bits from the run-in to climbing out, and I still have what I typed out all those years ago on government paper. Recycled paper is long since faded. As we dropped those bombs, he was saying, "Bombs are blacking, beautiful, beautiful. What the F is Greg Todd doing so close?" And at that stage, I was the number 4 extreme starboard, and my nav, Terry Bennett, had been saying to me, "Go left, go left." Well, this aeroplane next to me is getting a bit bigger, a bit bigger, a bit bigger. So when he said bomb's gone, I just put it on its side, 300 feet and 350 knots, and I was pulling away. So Chris Dixon was looking at 2 guys next to him, and then this one peeling off into the distance. Yeah. I said to him, when he got back, "Can I take that bit out of the tape?" "No, you bloody can't." Yeah. As I said, three different strikes in one day. It was a good day for us, and I think, nothing can bring back those poor buggers on the Viscounts, but I think it boosted morale in Rhodesia.
It certainly did.
We did a Mulungushi attack on the 22nd of December in 78. It was called Op Pygmy, and this is a big camp to the north of this Lake Mulungushi. And the first attack we did, I was with Doug Paget as my nav bomb aimer, and stupidly it was done at 300 feet with these alpha bombs again. And when we ran in, we could see the guns firing at us, or he could more so than I. But we put in a strike. I think there was, I don't know how many Canberras were on it. They decided, we ran through and all this stuff bursting around us. A bit unsettling, to say the least. Anyway, nobody got hit, and we went back, rearmed, and then went back there with 1,000-pounders in the afternoon just to make their day for them. But later, we did this op liquid, again one of these smash things, because we had 4 South African Canberras with us as well. And it was a night attack, and it was this offset technique that I described. The South African Canberras had come up to Rhodesia, and they were actually based at Filey, outside Hartley, to keep them out of sight of most prying eyes. And we'd take off from Salisbury, and we'd marry up with them, and off we'd set. And then we'd split. We'd put 2 of our Canberras, Chris Dixon and Ted Brent, and 2 of theirs. And that was green section. And then amber section was Ted Brent and myself and 2 of their Canberras. But also on the front wave with Chris Dixon, the green section, we're 2 hunters with 1,000-pounders. Now the hunter is designed to drop a 1,000-pounder in a 65-degree dive. So that's not going to happen in the middle of the night. And the plan was we were doing this offset bombing, and the nav would count down. And when he said tit to press, i.e. bombs gone, when he said tit to press, the hunters would just release their bombs in level flight, so the whole lot would go down. So there was quite a few bombs going down the first wave. 6, 24, 32 bombs, 1,000-pounders supposed to come out of the first wave. Well, and then amber section, our lot were about a minute behind. And when Chris was running in, he was trying to initiate the RAMS, the remote activated marker system, and nothing was coming up. And apparently, as we found out later, I think it was Shully, I'm not sure, had been unable to put the markers in and unable to contact anyone to advise, call off. So Chris ran in, I think we were about 16 or 18,000 feet. He couldn't see anything. And then he said, well, we've overflown the target. Well, we couldn't have told him that, because now all of the shit that was coming up from the ground, all this bloody tracer and ack, and it was like a firework display ahead of us. So Ted Brent quickly said to everyone, put on your proper bombing angle, you know, and we'll bomb the muzzle flashes, which is what we did. So Amber Section went in, dropped all our bombs, and we peeled off. But then the game was on for Green Section, because they were trying to wheel a big balbo of 4 Canberras and 2 Hunters each side at night in the pitch black. And somebody said that they'd actually blacked out the bottom of the nav lights so that they couldn't be seen from the ground. Whether that's true or not, I'm not too sure, because you know, if you went below, you'd lose sight of the airplane. So it made flying very, very difficult. And blokes were peeling off and getting lost. And they did a racetrack and came in. Now with all this extra flying, the Hunters were getting low on fuel. And Vic Whiteman, I think, was leading them. And he said, well, just go in there and throw your bombs where you think you should. And that caused a bit of concern for the Norman Walsh and the guys on the command deck, because Shirley and those guys were still around there. But apparently they were well out or well to the left. We had established that. So it wasn't the best bombing raid that we ever covered. You didn't cover ourselves in glory, but we did hit the target. And then we went back the next day in the morning and did Liquid 2, which obviously now is a daylight raid, didn't need offset bombing. Once again with the South Africans, and I think John's got a recording of that as well, also from my aircraft. I don't know, maybe you'll just put in the pertinent points. But there's my navigator. After we've done the bombing, again, we were under severe fire, and there's on a recording you can hear Hunters saying they think they've been hit, but they don't know where. But Paul now come out the nose, and he's holding up a photograph and saying, this is where our bombs went, you know, dang, 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 sort of thing. And then, as a pilot of the Canberra, you couldn't see where your bombs had gone. Mm-hmm. But once you'd flown out, and I managed to pull up and look over the wing, I could see, and there were still other bombs coming down. And a lot of them, unfortunately, dropped short in the water.
Greg, the South African pilots, you didn't really get to know them. You just met up in the air. They came in and...
That's right. The only Chris Dixon and Mike Ronnie had flown down to Filey with maps and briefing maps and photos for these South African guys. But I mean, I was flying next to 2 cans and I didn't know who the guys were. And it's interesting because many years later, my wife and I were down here in Somerset West, and we were between lets of our house, so we were jacking it up, and the estate agent came round with a bloke and to show him the house, and did he want to rent it? And he said he's also a pilot. I said, oh, interesting. Well, who do you fly for? SAA. Oh, I fly for the Dubai Airway. What do you fly? Oh, A340s. Oh, I fly 747s. Oh, right. Were you in the Air Force? Yeah, I was in the Rhodesian Airforce. He was in the SAF. I said, what did you fly in the SAF? It was Harvard's and working up to Canberra's. I said, well, I did Province of Vampires, Alouettes and Canberra's. I said, when did you fly your Canberra's? He said, anyway, 1978. I said, I was on Canberra's then. Did you do any combined raids with Rhodesian? Yes, I did 2 or 3. I said, you did them with me. I mean, this guy's name is Pete Ace. He rented my place for about 10 months after that. But I mean, there's, I don't know, 55 million people in South Africa. And I've got to meet the bloke that may have been my wingman.
Incredible. Yeah, what a story. Yeah.
We then, 2017, we went up to 12 Squadron, which is the South African Canberras, and they had a reunion, and they invited us guys, roadies from 5 Squadron, Rhodesian Airforce, and I met a lot of the guys who were, you know, all those years later.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Pete Ace wasn't there. But that's, you know, what an absolute coincidence, you know.
Greg, just talk a bit about these long-range reconnaissance flights where you were pushing your range with fuel and stuff, and what were the instructions in the event that something went wrong and you weren't going to make it back to Rhodesia?
Well, this is again involving the South African Airforce. Our aircraft, our cameras, you sat on a survival pack, and as part of your ejector seat. So when you went out, you'd come down, the seat would separate, but you'd still have your survival pack under your bum. You'd land, and then you had something to start life with. There's rations in there and stuff, but it was land-based, and the operation, the story I'm about to tell you, required dinghies and Mae Wests. So we repacked our survival packs. In fact, we actually had South African Airforce survival packs complete, and they just replaced them in our aircraft, in our ejector seats. And we had, we wore uniform overalls with all rank and wings and all taken off and any identification features removed. And we had the South African search and rescue beacons.
Where were you off to?
We were going to go north, and I can't remember. It was extreme north.
Mozambique.
Nakala. I'm sure it was Tanzania, but I've looked at the maps, and it's so long ago I can't remember the place.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been Nakala, but the object was because it must have been Tanzania, because they had these SAM-2s. It was like a great big telegraph pole, and they could reach our recce height. Anyway, the story was we went there looking for stuff being offloaded from docks, and there were T-54, 55 or 56 tanks being offloaded, and we got the photographs. But the story was that if you were shot down or anything like that, but any trouble, well, you just head east over the coast, out to sea, and eject, and then you would get in your nice dinghy supplied by the SAF and get out your search and rescue beacon and start chirping, and a submarine will come up beside you and rescue you. We believe this like heck. No, one-way ticket. But apparently it was true, because I met somebody from the South African Navy years later, and he said he was on the submarine there. And as we know, the SAS used this, had the help of those submarines when they raids on the Puta and Beira and things like that. So there was a lot of cooperation there. But there's a lot of disbelief in my crowd.
But a long way home. Jumping into the sea off the Tanzanian coast.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Okay, so well, there's a couple of photographs which hopefully John will supply.
Yeah.
The one, I'd been doing some photo recce with my nab Paddy Morgan up by Vic Falls on the border, obviously looking for camps and things like that. And we had to go and refuel at Vic Falls. But as we were approaching Vic Falls, Air Rhodesia Viscount had taken off and was heading back to probably Wankie or Salisbury, I don't know. Anyway, we overflew him at about 500 feet, and he didn't know we were there. And we used our cameras and took a wonderful photograph of a Viscount, which I've got the original photograph still.
Fantastic.
It's absolutely. You can see the writing. You can see the registration. Victor Papa, Yankee, November, India. And later in life, I actually flew that aeroplane when I joined then Air Zimbabwe after the Air Force.
Greg, then you went on to transports, and you were involved in resupplying the SAS in Mozambique in support of Renamo, Gorongosa, and that's where you were right at when the hostilities ended.
Yeah, I was on 3 Squadron for about 10 months, and I did a lot of, it was basically resupplying different places and crew changeovers and things like that. And obviously Fire Force duties, in support of the troops. But this Gorongosa thing, I probably did about 6 or 7 resupplies to Gorongosa with the decks. And Gorongosa was a big mountain halfway across Mozambique. And we initially fly out and drop the SAS by DAC. And weeks or months later, they'd be recovered by helicopter. But during that time, we would resupply them with arms and food and things like that, and we'd throw them out on static lines with crushed pallets, to dampen the thud when it landed. We'd fly in, and the guys from I can't remember which unit it was, but they were the people responsible for packing up the pallets and flight dispatchers or something like that, and they would physically shove it out the side of the deck, and it would go off on static line and land. But the thing was, Gorongosa was a big hill, so you had to get it right to land on top, because if you went too early, you'd go thud into the side of the hill, and I think maybe the bad guys could get it, or if they didn't, there wasn't much left of the pallet like that. And likewise, again, if you overshot, it would go on the other side. So it had to be fairly accurate, and we mainly succeeded. But when the British Monitoring Force came, all hostilities supposedly had finished. But we were still doing Renama. What it would happen was they were doing it now with C-130s with the SAF, and they would come up to Filey. Now, on the first sortie, I was sent down to fly with these guys as an observer and the man with the local knowledge, as it were. And off we. Now these C-130s, obviously, they had the ramp down the back, and they just lower the ramp and push much bigger pallets out. I mean, they could take far more than a deck. Anyway, we got there. And, obviously they did their own navigation, and I was able to say, well, that's the place, and this is where. This is the best running direction. It's all pre-planned anyway. Basically, there's a dog's body. And we're going around in an orbit, one each side, and throwing these pallets out. And I think they had some sort of system, and I stand to be corrected, but I think they flew with a notch of flap. And they'd either dump the flap or pull another notch, or to change the body of the angle of the aircraft to assist the guys shoving the pallet out the back. And I'd watched this, and there was 10 pallets on board, and I wanted to go and see what was happening, how they operated on the roller bed. So I stepped out the flight deck onto the roller bed to see, and at that time it was the last pallet, and they had aborted the drop. So they went around, but they still had the pallet on board. But now, whatever the reason was, the pallet was now travelling the opposite way to what it was supposed to go, with these guys pushing, about 4 of them, trying to stop this pallet. And there was battling to stop it. And the chances are that it would have come all the way back to the bulkhead. And it was so lucky I was there, because I just saw they had all these wooden chocks or wedges. And I managed to grab one and stick it underneath the aluminium pallet at the bottom and stop it. So the guys were a bit relieved that happened. Anyway, that was about the only incident. They were getting shot at, but they didn't know it most of the time. And that was basically, after that I'd resigned, and I'd got my commercial pilot's license and airline transport pilot's license, and as it was changing from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, I didn't want to fly for the Zimbabwe Airforce, and my 10 years coincided with the elections and things like that. So once I'd resigned, my friend Bob Dotman took great delight in sending me to the Forward Airfields as a forward airfield commander, which was like, it was all deserted, you had a pub there, tumbleweeds blowing around the revetments, no aircraft, nothing. So I spent the pub funds every night. Every night was a sixpence night or whatever. So, and at that stage we had assembly areas next to us, so the guys who were our enemies, they would come into our pub and drink at night, and very interesting.
Different time.
Yeah.
Greg, then you flew for Air Zimbabwe?
I then got out of the Air Force and got into Air Zimbabwe, and I flew Viscounts, 707s, and finally 737s with them for about 7 years. And during that time, I got my British airline transport pilot's license. And in '87, we emigrated to England, and I joined a company called Air Europe, flying 737 3 and 400s out of Gatwick. And that was going well. I got a command in about 18 months, and we were putting ourselves up by our bootstraps, because I'd gone there with 160 pounds, with nothing. And I got there halfway through the month, and they didn't pay me half salary at the end of the month. but I got a month and a half salary at the end of 6 weeks. But in the meantime, I had to pay rent and things like that. It was interesting, anyway. But with the first Gulf War, I was actually on leave in Zimbabwe when my wife phoned me to say Europe's gone into liquidation. And what had actually happened was that with the first Gulf War, people were scared to fly because of bombs on aeroplanes, hijacks, or being shot down or whatever. And that's when they started phone conferencing. And as you've seen now with COVID, it's developed into Zoom and things like that. But anyway, that was the end of that airline. By the time I got back from Zim, did my logbooks, sorted out CVs, sent them out. We lost 950 pilots, and there's probably about 50 jobs in Dan Air and the other airlines around. You had guys from Aussie who were strimming lawns with strimmers for the council.
Pilots.
Yeah, pilots. Yeah. I was lucky. I found out there was not going to be a job in Rhodesia, and I advertised in Flight Magazine and things like that. And I got selected to join a company called Air Hong Kong, which is flying 747 freighters out of Hong Kong. Now, if you remember the film Top Gun with Maverick, the character, he got bollocked by his instructor at one stage. He says, if you carry on flying like that, you'll end up flying plastic dog shit out of Hong Kong. Hello. That's what I ended up doing for 5 years on 747-100 freighters. But it gave me the background for my last job, which was flying for the ruler of Dubai in the Dubai Irving, the Royal Flight. And that was VVIP, gold taps and things like that for 13 years, and I was very grateful for that. And that's the end of my flying career. 10 years of military and 30 years of city, in a nutshell.
Interesting stuff. But thanks, Greg.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Very interesting.